risk of sounding overly sentimental, the tradition of storytelling has been around since the beginning of humanity. Whether it be fireplaces or on decks of ships to keep warm, there has been a connection that we have always sought with telling each other stories from our own lives or the lives of others. And one of my favorite stories is that of the Flying Dutchman, a ship cursed to sail the seas for infinity because of the pride of one man. While stories like a Kraken and the Leviathan may be seen by only one person with a grainy image, this story has been corroborated by a number of individuals over centuries. And while it doesn't make it any more factual, it makes it all the more fascinating. While the idea of a 300-year-old ship perpetually sailing around the Horn of South America is understandably preposterous, I've always been fascinated by the actual legitimacy of a ship based in 1641 that may have been sailing at that time and what it used to navigate the seas forever. In this video, we will break down the Dutchman's story, her sightings, and how a ship based in 1641 could sail the seas for infinity. So grab a seat, grab yourself a warm beverage in a holiday-themed cup. You're welcome, marketers. And let us begin. Now, like any great work of folklore, you need multiple origin stories. Fortunately, I have found the truth in one and only truth from an 1821 magazine called the Edinburgh Magazine from a man named Joseph Barrington. In a bygone day, I used to memorize these stories, but now I'll just read them to you word for word. Saves me the problems of retakes. Now, forewarning, all of the primary sources provided in this video will be linked in the description down below or in the materials of the writing provided. Now, in this dialogue, the first speaker replied, "They gave different reasons for it, but my story is this. She was an Amsterdam vessel and sailed from that port 70 years ago. Her master's name was Vanderdecken. He was a staunch seaman and would have his own way, in spite of the devil. For all that, never a sailor under him had reason to complain, though how it is on board with them now, nobody knows. The story is this, that in doubling the Cape, they were a long day trying to weather the Table Bay, which we saw this morning. However, the wind heated them, and went against them more and more, and Vanderdecken walked the deck, swearing at the wind. Just after sunset, a vessel spoke him, asking if he did not mean to go into the bay that night. Vanderdecken replied, "May I be damned if I should do, though I should beat about here till the day of judgment." And to be sure, Vanderdecken never did go into that bay, for it is believed that he continues to beat about in those seas still, and will do so long enough. This vessel was never seen, but with foul weather along with her. With the boring origin story out of the way, we can now get into the fun stuff. The sightings. We'll first hear the stories of three men who are clearly off their rocker. And then the voice of reason comes in, and Mr. John Lydon wraps up this case of eyewitnesses. Hand us a key to the case, for by the Lord, I'm damnedly scared. For do you see, I was just looking over the weather bow. What should I see but the Flying Dutchman coming right down upon us? That was a terrible impersonation, but I'm rolling with it. Neither the tempestuous state of the atmosphere nor the thunder had ceased, and soon a vivid flash of lightning showed the waves tumbling around us, and in the distance the Flying Dutchman scudding furiously before the wind under a press of canvas. The sight was but momentary, but it was sufficient to remove doubt from the minds of the passengers. At 4 a.m., the Flying Dutchman crossed our bows. A strange red light, as of a phantom ship all aglow, in the midst of which lights the masts, spars, and sails of a brig 200 years old, stood out in strong relief as she came up the port bow. It is a common superstition of mariners that in the high southern latitudes on the coast of Africa, hurricanes are frequently ushered in by the appearance of a specter ship, denominated the Flying Dutchman. But how does a ship that is now over 300 years old continue to sail under such primitive methods? In order for this analysis to work successfully, we need to make certain assumptions. First, we're going to assume that a state of decay does not exist on the Dutchman, and that all of her systems operate with the same efficiency today as they did back when she was first cursed. And speaking of curses, we're going to assume that the wrath of God does not mean that this ship cannot run aground or cannot be sunk. We're going to rely solely on the intelligence of the ship's captain and her crew. Now, for the case of the Dutchman, we'll treat it like a quarter. You place a quarter onto a table, and you set it in motion. And it continues on that motion with the chance that it might fall, but it continues to spin, and spin and spin, but ever with the constant idea and the knowledge that God's hand could smite you at any moment. Alright, are we agreed on those parameters? Excellent. Let's jump into it. First, we will discuss the compass rose. Now, after looking into the length of time the Dutchman has been sailing around the Cape, or the amount of people that have seen it, I'm left with several thoughts. One, the tools they used are quite primitive and incredible that they continue to work to this day. And two, Vanderdecken possibly assembled the greatest crew ever known to man to have sailed for that long with that amount of efficiency. Let me explain. Alright, let's talk about technology. The first piece of technology we're going to talk about is the compass rose. Now, there's the standard compass, which was a piece of magnetized material that naturally aligns itself with north and south poles. And this piece goes back to the 1st century AD with Chinese sailors. However, the compass rose we are talking about came about likely in Italy with a man named Flavio Gioio. This guy. Now, Flavio's design became famous due to him affixing the magnetized lodestone to a 16-point compass that was further refined into a 32-point compass. Now, whether Flavio came up with this design or not is somewhat irrelevant to the Dutchman's story, namely because its very existence in that time was useful for navigating and determining north and south in stormy weather. Next onto the stage for technology, we have the sextant. Now, the sextant's design is possibly one of the most iconic symbols of nautical life. By the time the Dutchman was sailing, there was a very solid technology surrounding the sextant that made it reliable and low for human error. And while individuals are far more qualified than I to talk about the use and the feel of different kinds of sextants, it is important to note its presence on the Flying Dutchman and its use to calculating the ship's location down to the minute when weather was amicable. Now, a sextant and compass, like any great tool made by man, is bound by human error. A sextant you should check probably upon every usage, and a compass needs to be remagnetized after a certain period of time for this material to maintain its accurate reading of north. Which means some poor soul on board the Flying Dutchman has been resetting a sextant and remagnetizing a compass since 1700. Now, outside of the Dutchman's hypothesized technology, there are several strategic moves made by Vanderdecken that give him a better chance of survival that we are pretty sure he's been using to maintain control of this. Firstly, he is possibly one of the most dexterous crews ever to sail the ocean. This is due to high storms having a chance of washing men overboard and being lost at sea. If enough men are washed overboard, there is no one to man your ship and keep it from taking on too much water, and you drown. Also, as a fair society, we need to praise Vanderdecken's foresight when he was loading up the Dutchman upon the beginning of her fateful voyage, that he maintained perfect weight and balance on the ship in Europe as he was sailing around the Cape. If the ship had been too light, she would have rolled over. If the ship's center of gravity had been off-center, she could also keel over. And, I almost forgot, we need to talk about the sails. Upon entering a storm, there is usually two options presented to a captain when looking at high wind speeds. A, you pull up your heavy-duty high wind sails, and you endure the high winds to keep them from getting torn to shreds, or you furl your sails. Now, we don't know which choice Vanderdecken made. The original story doesn't tell us, and all the sightings of the Dutchman don't tell us either. However, the paintings you will often see of the Dutchman feature it with tattered sails hung down. This way we can assume that it is sailing under heavy sails and have been broken up by the high winds. Looking back on the crew, the work that needs to be done, the amount of time she has been sailing, we can establish one thing very clearly. The tale of the Flying Dutchman is a folk story, ladies and gentlemen. There's nothing more to it than that. No, I'm kidding. I think the stories of the Dutchman, the eyewitness accounts, all go to show the mysteries of the ocean, even today, and especially back in the 1700s. Sailors saw or heard things they couldn't explain, and what better way to find commonality among your brethren than to relate those stories back to what is already known? Also, going back home and telling your family that you saw a ghost ship off the coast of Africa or South America is quite fantastic. Well, thank you for sticking around to the end. We have successfully navigated the Dutchman's origins, her lore, and navigational techniques that will keep her sailing to the end of days. Thank you very much for joining me. I'll see you in the next one.